Woman's Mysteries, Ancient and Modern by M. Esther Harding. Introduction by Professor Jung. Esther Harding, the author of this book, is a physician and specialist in the treatment of psychogenetic illness. She is a former pupil of mine, and her endeavors have been concerned not only with the understanding of the modern psyche, but in addition, she has tried, as the present book shows, to explore its historical background. Preoccupation with historical subjects may at first glance seem to be merely a physician's personal hobby, but to the psychotherapist it is, in a certain sense, a necessary part of his mental equipment. Concern with the psychology of primitives with folklore, mythology, and the comparative history of religions opens the eyes to the wide horizons of the human psyche, and in addition it gives that indispensable aid we so urgently need for the understanding of unconscious processes. Only when we see what shape and what guise dream symbols, which are apparently unique, appear on the historical and ethnic scene can we really understand what they are pointing at. Also, once being equipped with this extensive comparative material, we can succeed in comprehending more nearly that factor which is so decisive for psychic life, namely the archetype. Of course, this term is not meant to denote an inherent idea, but rather an inherited mode of psychic functioning, corresponding to that inborn way according to which the chick emerges from the egg, the bird builds its nest, a certain kind of wasp stings the motor ganglion of the caterpillar, and eels find their way to the Bermudas. In other words, it is a pattern of behavior. This aspect of the archetype is the biological one. It is the concern of scientific psychology, but the picture changes at once when looked at from the inside, that is, from within the realm of the subjective psyche. Here, the archetype presents itself as numinous, that is, it appears as an experience of fundamental importance. Whenever it clothes itself with adequate symbols, which is not always the case, it takes hold of the individual in a startling way, creating a condition of being deeply moved, the consequences of which may be immeasurable. It is for this reason that the archetype is so important for the psychology of religion. All religions and all metaphysical concepts rest upon archetypal foundations, and to the extent that we are able to explore them, we succeed in gaining at least a superficial glance behind the scenes of world history, and can lift a little the veil of mystery which hides the meaning of metaphysical ideas. For metaphysics is, as it were, a physics or physiology of the archetype, and its dogma or teaching formulates the knowledge of the essence of the dominance, that is, of the unconscious, leitmotifs of the psychic happenings predominating in that epoch. The archetype is metaphysical because it transcends consciousness. Now, Dr. Harding's book represents an attempt to present certain archetypal foundations of feminine psychology. However, in order to understand the author's endeavor, one has to overcome the prejudice that psychology consists merely of what Mr. Smith and Mrs. Jones happen to know about. The psyche consists not only of the contents of consciousness, which can be said to derive from sensory impressions, but also of ideas which seem to rest upon peculiarly altered sense perceptions. Sense perceptions which are modified by a priori and unconscious pre-existing formative elements, i.e., by the archetypes. This insight leads us to the conclusion that one part of the psyche may be explained through recent causes, but that another part reaches back to the deepest layers of racial history. If anything is certain concerning the nature of the neuroses, it is the fact that they are either based upon a primary disturbance of the instincts, or at least affect the instincts to a considerable extent. The history of the evolution of human anatomy and of human instincts reaches back into geologic epochs. Our historical knowledge throws light upon but a few paces of this road, whose length may be counted in terms of hundreds of thousands of miles. However, even that little bit is of help when, as psychotherapists, we have to correct a state of disturbance of the instincts. In this connection, it is the religions having myths of healing that teach us the most. They might indeed be considered a psychotherapeutic system which supports our understanding of instinctual disturbances, for these are evidently not just a recent date, but have existed since the most ancient beginnings of time. Although certain types of illness, notably those of infectious character, as for instance typhus antiquarum, may disappear while others may rise anew, there is still little probability that tuberculosis, for instance, might have been an entirely different illness 5 or 10,000 years ago. The same is true of psychic processes. Therefore, in the descriptions of abnormal psychic state furnished by antiquity, we are able to recognize features and connections which are familiar to us. And when it comes to the fantasies underlying certain psychoses and neuroses, then it is we find the most illuminating parallels in ancient and classical literature. It has been established for some time by experience that a certain one-sidedness of the conscious, in other words, a disturbance of balance, brings about a compensation from the side of the unconscious. This compensation is accomplished by means of the constellation and stressing of material, which is not infrequently simply complementary and which assumes archetypal forms of expression to the extent to which the fonction de réel, i.e., the correct relation to the surrounding world, is disturbed. When, for instance, a woman develops a too masculine orientation, something that may very easily happen owing to the social emancipation of women in the present-day world, the unconscious compensates this relative one-sidedness by a symptomatic accentuation of certain feminine tendencies. This process of compensation takes place within the personal sphere as long as the vital interests of the personality have not been harmed. When, however, more profound disturbances occur, as, for instance, when a loss of contact with the masculine partner has occurred, owing to the compulsion to be always in the right, then archetypal figures appear on the inner scene. Such difficulties are quite frequent, and they can only be removed by psychotherapeutic methods, once they have reached a pathological degree. Therefore, analytical psychology has striven for a long time to acquire as wide a knowledge as possible of the archetypal concepts and connections which are stirred up by the unconscious, in order to be able to comprehend the nature of the archetypal compensation in each case. That Dr. Harding, in addition to her professional work, has devoted herself to the considerable and even self-sacrificing effort of compiling, clearly and systematically, the archetypal material of the feminine compensation, brings a most welcome contribution to these endeavors. This investigation is valuable and important not only for the specialist, but also for the educated layman, which is interested in a psychology founded on experience of life and the understanding of people. Our times, which are characterized by an unusual philosophical disorientation in respects to basic concepts of life, stands in need, above everything else, of a vast amount of psychological insight, in order to give a new definition to the ens humanum. C.G. Jung.